E kore rātou e kaumātua tia pēnei I a tātou kua māhui nei. E kore hoki rātou e ngoi kore, aha ko pēhea I ngā āhuatanga o te wā. I te hekinga tū o te rā, taino ki te aranga mai I te ata, ka maumahara tōnu tātou, kia rātou. Welcome to the Hui Māori Current Affairs for all New Zealanders. E taro ake nei. A trans woman housed in a men's prison for 6 long months.
That was the hardest thing that I've ever been through in my life.
Now Hina Tūtake Waitere is demanding answers from corrections.
Why are you housing visible takatapuhi wahine in men's prisons?
When you're detained, you've got a right to be treated with dignity, and that just didn't happen.
Then turning the tide on a century of environmental degradation.
Just such an awful way to disconnect a community from a resource.
We check out the kaupapa that's bringing mussels back to the takutai moana of Tāmaki Makaurau. Tahuti mai. In 2018, Hina Tūtake Waitere was sent to jail for creating an elaborate Facebook scam where she not only stole the money but also the identities of her victims. There's no doubt Hina deserved to be held accountable for her crimes, but what she didn't deserve is what she claims were months of alleged assaults and rapes while in prison. Tonight, Hina shares her story to raise awareness of the dangers trans prisoners face in the hope of ensuring their rights are upheld. Anei te pūrongo a Annabelle Lee-Mather.
A trans woman sentenced to time in a men's prison.
The moment I got into the paddy wagon, I was like, no, this is not right.
Hina Waitere Tūtake alleges she endured months of sexual assaults at the hands of fellow inmates.
Entering prison, I knew what was going to happen. I experienced it all.
Her case raising important questions about how transgender prisoners are treated by corrections.
Provisions about transgender prisoners have been in place since 2014. Good policy, but on the ground, it's not happening.
Hina Waitere Tūtake grew up knowing she was takatapui, and so did her parents.
My father knew from the word go that I was going to be transgender because I was about maybe 2 or 3, and I asked for a pair of pink gumboots, and instead of saying no, he bought them.
But at 13, Hina started to drink. By the time her father died at 24, she'd hit rock bottom.
I was just surviving. It was, where do I get the next drink from?
Her addiction would ultimately lead to a life of crime. When I first met Hina in 2016, she'd just been revealed as the mastermind behind a catfishing scheme on social media.
It was basically financial gain, as disgusting as it sounds.
Ripping off thousands of dollars from multiple victims.
I actually am sorry.
Hina took responsibility and went before the courts. Now she's sharing her experience of the justice system.
What's happened since I last saw you, Hina?
So I was sentenced to a sentence of 3 years, 9 months in the Wanganui District Court.
Were you surprised to get a custodial sentence, or were you expecting that?
No, I was expecting it. Yeah, I was expecting it.
But what Hina wasn't expecting was to be sent to a men's prison.
So when you got there, Hina, did anybody come down and say to you, obviously you're a trans wahine,
No.
you're going to have some special needs or requirements? Was there any kind of support like that?
No. I didn't know that they had support plans for takatapuhi wahine entering into men's prisons.
What Hina should have been told on arrival is that she had the right to request a transfer to a women's prison and that there were procedures and protections in place for transgender inmates, but she says this didn't happen. Hina's lawyer, Amanda Hill.
One of the key principles of corrections is to ensure that people are informed about their rights and entitlements. So it was on corrections to go to Hina and say, these are your rights, these are your entitlements. We have a positive duty to keep you safe. It's not on Hina to know, walking into prison, what the paperwork is, what her rights are, what her entitlements are. Most people don't.
Instead, Hina would spend 6 long months serving alongside violent male offenders, eating, exercising and showering.
Were you expected to use the same shower facilities?
Yes, I was, and that was the hardest thing that I've ever been through in my life.
And it was in those shower blocks where Hina alleges the sexual assaults against her began.
Can you describe for me the types of attacks that you endured?
So anal sex, oral, gang rape. I experienced it all.
How many times were you assaulted in prison?
Heaps of times.
Were the people who attacked you ever punished?
No. No. I have to live in the same town as some of these men.
Despite being injured during the alleged attacks, Hina says she didn't receive medical care and her complaints weren't recorded. She also alleges she saw other trans women being forced into unwanted sexual encounters with fellow inmates.
They're having to do it to live in there, to be able to eat. They don't say anything because they don't have that support. There's no support for trans women.
Even without the additional risks of being a trans prisoner, the rate of violence between prisoners is really high. And I don't accept that when you go into prison, you get what you give, and that is not what our legislation says. When you're detained, you've got a right to be treated with dignity, and that just didn't happen.
6 months after entering Whanganui Men's Prison, Hina says she was finally moved to a women's jail at Arohata after being spotted by a community law officer.
She said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Huh?" And she goes, "You need to get in touch with a lawyer and get the ball rolling because you shouldn't be here."
Did you feel safer at Arohata?
I did. I did feel safe, but I knew that a lot of the biological wahine weren't happy with it.
You felt unwelcomed there?
Unwelcome, so majority of my life I felt like that.
In an Official Information Act request to corrections, we asked how many trans women had served sentences in a men's prison. The latest figures from 2019 to 2020 show 21 trans women had been housed with male inmates. What is the most appropriate way for corrections to house trans women, do you think?
There's no straightforward answer to that because every prison's needs are different, but I guess the key thing is to ensure that you're giving the right information and giving the right options to people, making sure that they're actually safe where they are.
We approached corrections for an on-camera interview about Hina's case, but it declined. In a statement to the Hui, it says, Corrections has again taken this latest complaint seriously and is looking into the allegations made, including any further evidence that has been provided. As this complaint is still being addressed, we are limited in our ability to provide you specific comment. We have also suggested that this person consider her option to make a formal complaint to police, as they are the appropriate agency to investigate matters of alleged assault and sexual assault.
It seems to me that it'd be incredibly difficult for a victim of an assault in prison to have evidence of it, because obviously it's not going to happen in front of guards.
What we know, and what I know from my line of work, is that it takes a victim of sexual abuse a really long time to report, and that particularly for people in prison, that they may not disclose it until they're out, by which time, of course, the entity can say, well, there's no documents here, you didn't report it at the time.
Corrections says it's still considering the other aspects of Hina Waitere Tūtaki's claims, including the alleged failure to inform her of her rights.
I would like to see meaningful training happening in our prisons to ensure this doesn't happen again, because Hina's certainly not the first, and I worry for the safety of our trans prisoners now, and I don't think enough is being done.
I just need closure on the whole situation that's happened. And
Hina is now working part-time as a carer and moving on with her life, but she wants an apology and she wants answers.
first and foremost, what my question to the Corrections Department would be is, why are you housing visible takatapuhi wahine in men's prisons? I don't care whether this takes me 4.5 years or 40 years. I'm still going to be here opening my mouth and wanting answers, because I'm not the only takatapuhi in this country that's been through it.
And we received this statement from Corrections Deputy National Commissioner Lee Marsh. We have a duty of care to people in prison, and every individual we manage deserves to feel safe and be treated with dignity. In March 2018, Corrections introduced a strengthened policy for the management of transgender prisoners, with a focus on being responsive to individuals and their circumstances, regardless of whether they are housed in a prison that aligns with their gender identity. We do acknowledge that collectively, as an organisation, there is more we need to learn to fully support every person we manage. Some staff may not necessarily have first-hand knowledge or experience with the challenges and complexities some transgender people face, but we are committed as an organisation to change this. In recent years, we have actively worked to improve how we can support transgender people who come into our care. Over 2,000 staff have attended diversity workshops, which focus on building an awareness and understanding of the LGBTQIA+ terminology, respecting dignity and being aware of unconscious bias. Next, we dig deeper into colonial history of the Anzacs. Auraki mai anō. Every year, Aotearoa acknowledges the special relationship between the New Zealand and Australian Army Corps. Contrary to popular belief, the Anzac bond wasn't forged on foreign battlefields, but right here in Aotearoa. In fact, it's estimated more than 3,000 Australians fought shoulder to shoulder with colonial troops during the New Zealand wars, including the invasion of Waikato. Now, iwi historian Taitimu Maipi wants more New Zealanders to understand the roots of our Anzac traditions and the impact it's had on the people of Tainui. And he joins me now from Rahui Pōkeka. Tēnā koe e te matua.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Hey, I was just wondering, with your Tainui background and your Waikato hat on, tell me, what happens on Anzac Day down there? Do you commemorate it?
Well, we never, no, we didn't actually, because as the one growing up, there was never a story about what happened with the landlords to us or Anzac. Our grandparents for some reason, I remember being a young man, and I raised it with my grandparents. And the ladies jumped in and said, "Oh, we can't talk about that." Because we became very Christianized. When we were growing up, we had the Anglican Church on Te Hake Marae. At Waihi, we had the Paimarere. Up at the Kāri, you had the Mormon Church. And the churches that sort of denied us the history and kept the stories of what happened on the battlefields until recently, well, actually until now. It's the first time that, probably the second time, 2017, we recognised the battles of Rangiriri and we did a little bit of stories behind that. And now this year, there's a major discussion around the battles of Rangiriri with the opening of the history and the trenches. So it's been an interesting story, but never told to us.
Yeah, learning as you have, like 2,500 to 3,000 Australians soldiers had come over at the beck and call of Governor Gray to fight in the Waikato War. I mean, what do you think now? Is that new to you?
Yeah, well, it's actually quite new about the Australians, because I remember on 2017 when they did the stories at the Rangiriri, the Australians came across and entered into the battlefields, just trying to give a background about what happened back in 1863. It was a terrible experience when I think about now that we know the true stories of what happened. But like I say, our grandparents never talked too much about it. The only time I heard it once, actually, it was through the song of a song called King Tawhia. And there was this song being sung. And I just give a little bit of what that song was about. So Tutatai can have a song, sing the song. But it was a song about the war. But it was only in a small group of people that they talked about what happened. It was a very, very close history of when we were growing up until now.
How's it been for you and your whānau in the last, 10, 15 years, starting to really learn some of these early stories?
Oh, yes, very much so. As a matter of fact, more so than ever before, given that we're going to be having it in the kura, so that our people can be part of understand the background and what happened during those terrible times.
Yes, I mean, there's been wānanga taupatupatu, if you like, around whether the New Zealand wars should be commemorated or remembered on Anzac Day. But when you look at where New Zealand and Australia fought together back in those early wars, do you think that there's a place for to remember the descendants of those on Anzac Day?
For us, of course, I think that, and that's what we're doing now. It's interesting that we're celebrating Anzac Day on Monday, and we've got the opening of the battlefields of Rangiriri that's happening now. So there's the local people have opened up opened the battlefields for our people to go through and have a look and tell the story of what happened back in those dark days.
Yeah, we were talking earlier before we started recording about some of the Australians that are actually laying in some of the urupa around the Waikato. I imagine there's many more all throughout the Waikato that we don't really know. Do you think?
No, that's quite true. That when the Australians came over, and then apparently they were given, after the land wars, they were offered land that belonged to us. And and they're still there. The history of those invaders are still on those lands that they took in 1863. I mean, it's about time we sent them home, like they sent the 501s back here to New Zealand. We should send them back to Australia after what they've done to our people back in those dark days. And it was wrong. it was painful. All of those stories, when you listen, the only time that you listen to those kinds of stories is in the Waikato, and when you go into Matatini, and you know, our people do tell the stories through their haka and to their Waikato. So that's the only time you actually get the real story about what happened in when the Australians came here.
Well, tēnā koe matua, thank you, and hopefully, you know, this becomes some of the learning of the history in our kura in days to come. So, e mihi ana kia koutou ki a koe mō tō wā. Kia ora.
Kia ora mai tātou.
Kia ora.
Me.
Kei tua o ngā whakatairanga, he kaupapa mana moana. Next, we look at how Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei are restoring the mauri of their moana. An iwi-led mussel restoration project in Tāmaki Makaurau is proving it's never too late to restore the taiao. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is on a journey to undo the environmental degradation caused at Okahu Bay as a result of Auckland's rapid growth. Recently, more than 60 tonnes of mussels were transported to Okahu Bay to create mussel reefs in an effort to restore the natural ecosystem. Anei te pūrongo a John Boynton.
Okahu Bay has experienced environmental devastation for more than 100 years as a result of the growth of Tāmaki Makaurau.
We all have to take better responsibility for our environment, because that has looked after us far more than we have looked after it.
In 1914, Auckland's sewage was discharged into Okahu Bay, polluting Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei's shellfish beds, the contamination causing illness to whānau living here.
That was the outlet, the sewage outlet, and all that our whānau experienced down there, and the typhoid and the diseases, and you know, they're just such an awful way to disconnect a community from a resource.
This painful past leaving a deep impression on twin sisters Moana Tamariki Pohe and Donna Tamariki.
There are still whānau today that were down there and, you know, speak of the hurt and what that meant to them. This is our taonga and this is our pātaka kai, and that they were disconnected from it. And to see the sewage floating in the bay was such an insult.
But the Tamariki whānau have never lost their connection to the area or traditional mātauranga practices, taught to them by their father, Tamaitsi Tamariki.
So Dad always referred to the moana as his playground, but knowing full well that it was what sustained him and his family. It was all around knowing what species of fish to catch at what period, in terms of tides, in terms of the maramataka, in terms of spawning seasons. So all of those things were learnt.
Tamaitsi and other kaumātua from Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei had a vision for Okahu to be restored to full health. Ecologist Rochelle Kahui McConnell believed traditional mātauranga held the key to bringing Okahu back to life.
So she collected some really, really beautiful stories and got a sense from the kaumātua that they saw it in a way that they loved it, and it was healthy and it sustained us, to that being taken away from us. Now that's been a period of 50 years of not encouraging their children and their children's children to swim in the bay because it wasn't healthy.
Rochelle floated the idea of creating kutai or mussel reefs to restore the mauri of the bay. Kutai are called the kidneys of the sea. They can remove heavy metals and harmful bacteria, clearing the water and stabilising the seafloor. Once prolific in the Hauraki Gulf, kutai are now virtually extinct here, with around 1,500 kilometres of mussel beds decimated by commercial dredging.
So the mussel restoration mahi is big, and it's been scaled up like on steroids, like super scaled up from what we started with.
From paddling the mussels out and dropping them by hand to having a huge barge.
We've got a vested interest. This is in our hearts, our heads and our pukus. It's our job to make sure that we do a good job now so that our kids have got something to pick up later.
But both Moana's father and Rochelle never lived to see the completion of the 10-year project and witnessed this final drop of more than 60 tonnes of kutai shipped in from the Coromandel a few weeks ago. Moana able to share the moment with all the people who brought the project to life.
I think for me today what was really important was to acknowledge those that really put in the hard yards and had the faith that really made sure that this project came to fruition.
Those who have been a part of the journey here to see the final load of mussels relocated to their new home.
The kutai will sink overnight into the seabeds. From there they clump together, creating an unbreakable bond. Then nature takes its course and the filtration process begins.
The mussel drops are already having their desired effect on Okahu Bay's water quality.
The water looks different, it smells different, it tastes different and it feels different. The amount of people that you see on the beach now that come here to swim, we wouldn't have seen that a year ago.
And the sisters are sure both their dad and Rochelle would have been proud to see their vision come to life.
We're pretty certain that Rochelle would have been dancing on the deck of a waka on the water, and our dad would have, one of his favourite expressions was "wowee."
Wowee.
Yeah.
He would have just been in awe.
Moana and Donna believe everyone has a role in being a kaitiaki and helping the taiao to heal.
If we all take care of that little jewel place that we love, then together we're going to collectively do big and great things. I think Okahu is a really great example of what others can be doing elsewhere.
Nā John Boynton, tērā pūrongo. Ko hikene te hui e huama, nohoro mai rā. Nā te puna whakatongarewa te hui I tautoko.